We have Jessie, we have Whynde, we have Sally here to talk about what we see coming in 2022. So Jessie, back to you on the report. Talk to us a little bit about what Harvard has seen sort of coming for the year ahead.
When we looked at the year ahead, we kind of focused on 5 key areas that we saw there was going to be the biggest ramifications from I guess where the biggest change was going to happen. So we already touched on the new world of work, slightly with the kind of frontline worker focus and a kind of influx of innovation there. But I think also something we've seen in 2021 and we expect to increase in 2022 is that real focus on empathetic leadership. I think we've just talked about how COVID changed a lot of our working practices, but I think that's had a real change on how people lead and how people run businesses, and how in the wake of all those kind of personal interactions, you continue to make sure that people feel some sense of belonging, they feel that they're cared for, and that kind of more pastoral element, I think, in combination with the Great Resignation, is just going to be really interesting to look at how the softer side of business is going to be really critical as we go forward and for businesses to balance. The second area we looked at was all around every business is a tech business. And I think we touched on this already slightly around just the sheer pace of digital transformation. A lot of the changes that have happened and we've kind of taken for granted in the tech industry have really kind of come to the fore in a lot of more of those kind of laggard industries that maybe have been slower to transform and were really kind of forced to change. So I think that's been super interesting. I think specifically around technical debt is something, this has been discussion that's been around for ages, but I think for businesses really having to look at that and kind of work out how they balance their technical debt, how they address that moving forward, and how it become a kind of looming thing that hangs over them. And then I'll touch on responsible business in a minute, but I think your point, Oliver, around the changing consumer and about digital subcultures, fascinating. So there's a real kind of tug of war here, because at one point you've got the rise of TikTok during the pandemic, big focus on D&I, rightly so, and that's fantastic to have seen, kind of coming together where people have finally found spaces online where they feel that they belong, they can be themselves, they can do things that really kind of express their personality and their kind of creativity. And I think looking at how over the year ahead that's going to kind of continue to roll out in the digital world and across tech, and how as kind of comms and marketers, I guess from my perspective, thinking about how we can tap into that and move away from some of those really kind of traditional demographic kind of, I guess, quite binary focused ways of looking at people, and start to see all those different subcultures coming out. Yeah, I think it's just so interesting to see as the year goes on. And I guess interchange with that is then kind of our 5th pillar we talked about in the trends report, which is all around regulation, which I know, Oliver, you're interested in and kind of want to talk a little bit about. Looking at how the cookieless internet, how the ramifications that's going to have on everyone, and how a lot of the practices that a lot of tech companies and companies at large have relied on for so long now, and they're going to have to kind of change the way they do things as well. So many kind of, I've just kind of talked about a kind of broad suite of things there, but just so many interesting kind of trends that are all going to interplay over the next year and beyond.
That's a fantastic summary, and let's jump on a couple of those points. So one, I'm going to geek out for a moment on technical debt. I think for a long time organizations could get away with technology not quite being right, because for some organizations it was almost a secondary channel, right? And so all of a sudden what's happened with the digital transformation we've all been talking about is it's become primary and always on, and it needs to be resilient. And so before, technical debt, it's a bit like what Sally was talking about earlier, the business case maybe didn't stack up to replace something because it didn't bring in enough revenue or wasn't costing too much. Now, no, that's not the critical factor. The critical factor is that platform actually allowing you to do business and support your customers or support your ecosystem or whatever it is it's supposed to be doing 24/7 with no outages. Before, yeah, okay, only needed to work 9 to 5. No, now it needs, if anyone wants to use it online, it needs to be there and available. And so I wanted to throw that out to either Whynde or Sally. Is that something you've kind of seen, the sort of importance and criticality and the robustness of tech being more valued now, whereas before it was like, yeah, we don't really care, that thing's a bit clunky?
I would say yes, for sure. And, on the tech debt point as well, I think companies are are getting a little bit more strategic about how they look at it and putting the business lens on top of that to really understand what's important, what isn't, how do we prioritize? And even I hear a lot more of organizations saying, we're going to intentionally make this decision to go into tech debt because it meets this criteria, or we're going to leave this alone. So I do very much see that. And I think the technology has become mission critical and blending with the business. That's the other trend we see, right? Technology and business just absolutely blended, moving out of just the realm of enablement to really blended with strategy.
Are you seeing that, Sally, that blend of tech and business? Is that something you've seen?
Yeah, I think there's a phrase I saw in one of the reports you shared, Oliver, around engineering for AI. So one of the biggest costs that we have in our responsiveness is we spin up models for specific customers for their specific requirements, but then we have a whole load of data engineering, pipeline management, operations that's put into the investment request. And actually that doesn't enable us to be responsive and give our customers the answers that they're looking for, because we're so busy setting up that AI engineering. That in a sense is a technical debt for me, because when another use case comes along, we'll have to set up a whole new instance. And equally, when talking to earlier, when life cycles selling internationally in the spaces that we are being pushed back constantly because funding issues, it means that the code gets put on a shelf, for want of a better term, and then it's incredibly expensive for us to take that model back off the shelf and redeploy it and get it working again. I mean, we've got estimates about 3-month timeline. So we're really trying to re-engineer our business investment around investing in product teams rather than projects. And I know that's a phrase that people talk about, that doesn't sound very innovative, but from a practical level, businesses fund projects because they have very clear objectives and outcomes, and that doesn't translate when you're working with an IT infrastructure. We've got some very nervous business architects within our business at the moment where we're saying we just want a pot of money to spend based on what we want, and they're like, oh, hang on a minute, what is that going to be? We want those people available, so you need to start putting people to that project. It's almost like a technical debt that is coming through our lack of speed to respond to customer demand.
Right. Do you know what the phrase that sprung to mind when you were just talking then was the project cult? I don't know if you've heard this, the kind of so moving away from the project cult and moving to products maybe is the way out of technical debt. So for many organizations, they have just been very siloed in their thinking and fixed vision in terms of, right, this project will deliver X. Whereas I like what you're saying, which, if people embrace the product mentality, and it's obviously not new, but maybe the criticality of the products and the platforms that every organization is running now is forcing everyone to go, do you know what, we need to rethink the project cult. We need to think more about investing in capability. And Whynde, Sally was talking there about business architects. Is this a theme? Is this a trend that you're seeing?
Oh, the project to product. Most definitely. And by the way, to your last point there about, is this a way out of tech debt? I think that's a really interesting point. I also think it's a way to help us think holistically about our organizations. So that's business architecture right there, of course, but really serving the customers and really thinking about the products and services and the value that we deliver them, instead of sort of that internal focus and just feeling good because we're delivering things, right? Sort of humans have this bias towards action, and we feel good when we're doing stuff, but knowing how it really collectively adds up. And I love the point too, because honestly, from a business architecture perspective, the shift from project to product, that mindset, what that's done to organizations, the agility mindset is probably one of the top things, the top challenges for business architects worldwide, to both rethink how they fit in that mindset, as well as make sure that we bridge the gap that is still there, which is the really big view of strategy into execution and how we work together to do that.
Jessie, I'm going to come back to you on regulation. I think the regulator is having to jump in and get involved, because for too long, organizations have ignored the stuff that's getting dusty. And that's the technology that they've not looked at for a long time. That's actually where the security issues are, where the potential data breaches or what have you. And actually it's taking the regulator and governments to go, do you know what? You can't just focus on your new shiny stuff. You've got to make sure you know what you've got, that it's secure, that it's well managed, etc. And I see that coming with the telco security regulation, which is going through the sort of final phases of Parliament at the moment, where essentially telcos will have to know, they'll have to have an inventory, they'll have to know where they have high risk vendors, they will need to be on top of the sort of vulnerabilities and things. But there's also been the same sort of thing coming for the sort of digital platforms as well, isn't there? So be interested in your take on, you touched on the cookieless internet, but my personal thinking is that 2022 will start to see more of regulation in how different industries, essentially professionalize their technology.
It's a really interesting space, I think, and there's been a lot of conversation over it for the last few years around some of the lack of regulation in the tech space, and we've always known it's coming. And I think technology companies really know that this is on the horizon. We've seen obviously some of the kind of bills that China have put in place in terms of their regulation there, and I think we're starting to see that almost kind of by coincidence or by design, that kind of China's becoming this kind of de facto regulator for the world on things. So when they say, okay, well, these are the parameters we're going to set out, here's how we're going to work, here's how tech companies have to align with what we're recommending from a government perspective, you'll see that will have ramifications globally, and in the US and the UK, companies realise that they'll have to kind of consider that, governments be looking at it as well, and kind of saying, okay, well, if that's what China's doing, we probably need to kind of take heed of what we're doing on a local level as well. So I guess kind of similar thing around regulation around sustainability for tech as well. To date, there's kind of been a goodwill, I guess, that organisations are doing the right thing and they're driving towards the right direction. But I think unless there's those regulations in place, a lot of companies will pay lip service or do the kind of minimum. And I think we'll start to see that as regulation kind of grows, that businesses will start to kind of have to make moves on these things in a more kind of meaningful way than they have.
It's almost inevitable that COP26 promises will flow into government regulations and rule changes, right? And I think also what's coming is a whole bunch of lessons that governments have learned about how industries respond in times of crisis. I mean, just look at supply chain issues that the UK has sort of run into. Who else would like to perhaps comment on what they see coming out off the back of COP26? I mean, personally, before I do hand over, personally, I hope it moves us from the sort of talking about it to the action. It's well overdue that people just talk about this, organisations talk about this as a way to make their end of year report look good. It needs to be fundamentally, what are you doing and how are you rethinking? I mean, Sally, any sort of perspectives on how sustainability is really going to get driven into organisation strategy and culture?
Yeah, so back in the summer, we ran a 5-day sustainability sprint to really be opportunity first, rather than seeing it as a negative and compliance and something that's going to prevent growth. What we found actually was that there's no one person that has a business problem around sustainability. It's all of our responsibility to incorporate sustainability within our everyday decisions. So what organisations are doing are adding those sustainability requirements to business leaders' personal objectives. However, unfortunately, I think what we've seen is ESG reporting, so environment, social, I forgot what the G is, but anyway.
Governance.
Thank you. I was going to say governmental, but that's because I work for Ordnance Survey. It is moving to the risk department, which is really, really disappointing because it's an absolutely huge opportunity area that businesses can, jump on around, the new green economy, new green skills. We talked about creative destruction. I think this is one of the biggest opportunity areas, but there's just a massive counterweight to this where business and money lumps on, for a better term. We need to make sure it's for the right things for people and planet. So carbon credits, for example, there's a whole load of hype around that, but we can't plant enough trees to deal with our carbon deficit. So it's going to be really interesting, and I hope it's a very sort of creative stage of hype and then disillusionment happening very, very quickly because we haven't got time. So I'm excited, and I see it as an opportunity area, sustainability, just as long as it's not like a dot-com boom where the few make loads of money and we don't get the right outcomes.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I mean, Whynde, when I look to Scandinavia, I see an awful lot of progress, particularly on electric vehicles, right? I mean, one highlight of this year was finally being able to afford to join the electric car revolution, because it is still a privileged thing for many. I know cheaper cars are coming on the market, but it's still quite an expensive decision to go electric. But I know certainly in Norway, if I'm correct in picking the right country here, I think EVs are outselling normal cars and have done for quite some time. And I'd be interested in your take on, how is that received? Is that just sort of, is everyone really proud of that? Are there big challenges in that shift? Is the rest of Scandinavia going to go that way? What are your sort of thoughts on that sort of side of things?
Absolutely. And I have joined the electric car owners as well just recently, but no, you are exactly right. It's something like 50-60% of the new car sales over this last period have been electric. So, what's so fascinating is it's almost feeling like in Norway, we're going to have a shift, like it's going to be in a blink, where all of a sudden, how could you be driving a combustion engine? It's almost feeling like it's getting that point. And, we have sort of this selective memory of our choices before. So I would say it's very well received. But I also think what has been done very well, which is a good illustration of systemic change, is benefits have been put into place, right? For example, you can drive in the bus lanes. You get a credit on tolls, right? Even so much as if anyone has an electric car, they have to put in an electric plug-in, and that is helped by the commune to actually offset that. So it's been a systemic change, and I do also think that a deep love and respect for the environment that is utterly in the DNA here has underpinned that, and I think there's a lot we can learn from all of that.
Yeah, can I just jump on? I think that's a fantastic example of private and public partnership, because we as consumers can buy as many electric vehicles as we like, but if there isn't the rewiring of our energy systems, that isn't digitized, and then the infrastructure to enable charging, which comes from government, we are going to come to a bit of a inflection point.
No. Totally agree, Sally. I mean, last week or week before last, I went to Manchester, and it was just probably one of the longest journeys I've done from south, and it was fine, but it wasn't easy finding an overnight charge point in Manchester. Right, it could have been a lot easier, and so it was a bit. I almost jumped in my wife's petrol car. Right, it was kind of like, should I just take the easy option? But no, I did it. But you're right. I mean, there is a lot more that needs to be done. I mean, Jessie, what are you seeing with the organisations you work with around sustainability? Are there any kind of major themes and trends that you see kind of going into the new year around this space?
Yeah, I think one of them we've touched on here, which I think is historically the kind of mainstream narrative around sustainability has been there's been a lot of onus on the consumer, right? So a lot of focus on product, a lot of focus on plastic, things that we can see, we can feel, we can touch. For the everyday consumer, a kind of conception that if they stop using kind of plastic bottles, then everything will be okay. And I think what the last year has taught us is that we can see the effects it's having on the environment. We can see it. We've got the fires, we've got the floods. We can really see it now. And I think that's suddenly kind of awoken everyone to the fact that doing these small changes and those small nudges aren't going to kind of keep us ahead of what's happening at the planet level. Kind of happened a bit this year, and we think 2022 it's going to really start to shift into is a bigger focus onto things we can't see, which has huge ramifications for all the tech companies, right? So I think it's like Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, all the big tech companies together use the same amount of electricity in 2021 as New Zealand.
I was staggered by that stat. That was a brilliant stat. And sorry to jump in, but we've covered this topic. And previously, we spoke to a chap called Gunnar Menzel, who is the Chief Innovation and Architect Officer at Capgemini. And it is just staggering, isn't it? The amount of energy that's that we don't realize when we pick up our phone and use an app. We don't appreciate it's not just us recharging the phone. There's an awful lot like that's hidden below the waterline of the iceberg in this space, isn't there?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's where, again, like the shifts to cloud, things like that, the everyday consumer might be making those small incremental changes about the things that they buy and the products they consume, probably haven't really understood what the cloud actually means. The cloud, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just means it's a big data center somewhere else, right? They're just not on-prem. And I think that's kind of interesting. I think there's going to start to be a real shift where organizations realize, and consumers, governments, the kind of regulatory body is going to start to come in and say, just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not important to address. And I think 2022 is the year that we're kind of advising our clients to kind of get ahead of that and think about, okay, well, at some point bigger regulation is coming out of the wake of COP26, starting to think about that and really, as we kind of talked about, I guess, start to see the environment as a stakeholder rather than kind of something that's incidental that might be impacted.
It's a link with regulation. The ISO standards for environment, it's got a 4 in it. I won't pretend to reel it off, but that has really helped focus Ordnance Survey's business. We have huge data centres. We collect a huge amount of data through our mapping activities, and while our building is completely sustainable, there's been a huge amount of work to ensure the cooling of those systems are sustainable. And I think Microsoft have done some leading work around helping organizations look at how they manage those huge energy eaters in a better way. I completely agree, it's completely hidden, but what I am seeing is in RFPs that we're responding to, questions are coming up around what are you as an organisation doing from a social perspective, from an environmental perspective, and hopefully that will drive businesses to ensure that their back office is just as sustainable as it's marketing collateral. It's
been interesting to sort of see the big tech companies put data centers where there's perhaps clean energy or a cooler climate, so that they need less cooling and things like that. But staying on the topic of things we can't see, but I think is super, super important. One of the things that's, I suppose, touching back onto this year, to 2021 for a moment, is the rise that I've seen of people talking about mental health and impacts of things like apps and so on kids, on different sort of vulnerable sort of populations. I think that's been quite encouraging. And what's your thoughts? I mean, Sally, let's stay with you on what product managers and product organizations are perhaps going to do to sort of make sure that those things are considered. Because I think at the moment there is certainly a mistrust, isn't there? I think in a lot of online platforms, a mistrust in data and information. And just really interested in your take on what perhaps you might see changing. Do you see this getting better in the short term, or is this a big sort of shift? Sorry, a lot of questions at you there.
No, great. I think we need to, a phrase I use a lot at work is we need to build the muscle. I think we need to learn how to do this. I see a lot of straplines around ethics of data. Well, we didn't do philosophy degrees. So, I mean, how are product managers, which, can I just say, product management is a new discipline. You can't go to university and study product management. So, and again, with the brain drain, it's the best product managers are at the top 6 technology companies. So we've had project managers migrating into product, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but we all need to be vulnerable and humble about what we don't know and the unintended consequences of our design, and have to be flexible in responding to things that we don't perceive. But the biggest I think salve to that is being really clear about our inputs into product. So I mean, I've been on a massive learning curve, but the quality of data, provenance of data, data on data is so important, because if you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out, and that transects society. People getting information about a COVID vaccine, how do they have critical thinking around, is this the right information to give myself the informed choice, to algorithms, giving recommendations, how how do we then look at that recommendation and go, that recommendation is based on the data inputs that we put into it, unless it's generalized, but there isn't that real investment in data fabric, and to make sure that we're really, really clear what are the answers that we're getting, and why are they that way. And I think what's actually been amazing is sort of the epidemiology crisis has really brought science communicators to the fore to help us understand provenance of data and why results are coming this way. I can't say his name, but I read David Spiegel. He's from the Cambridge Science of Epidemiology University, and he is brilliant at saying why are we getting certain results, and that is in mainstream news. And so where I'm saying build the muscle, we can take learning from what's happening into our society and have a conversation internally about how we build products. But I mean, it's freaking hard. I don't know the answer. The big companies will have the best talent to help organizations do this. And then there's the rest of us that are trying to figure out the right things, because of course we don't want to have unintended consequences.
Everyone talks about AI kind of blowing up in this really scary, militarized kind of way, like Terminator, all those sort of films, The Matrix, Terminator, etc. But actually, what I think is happening is accidentally, through to your point, not having good enough data, is the AI we're building into everyday lives is actually just sort of going wrong slightly in lots of different places. And it, we can laugh about it, but unfortunately, it has pretty horrible implications, right? When you get online bullying, or you get someone who just doesn't feel comfortable about something, or you get people trapped at home day in, day out without enough social interaction. There's a sliding scale of where we're kind of getting ourselves to.
I think it's underpinned though by a shifting mindset around holistic thinking and end-to-end thinking, right? And just to maybe underscore some of the points here, it's not good enough that we have this ethics policy here and we do this, but that we produce a product or service that compromises other people when they use it. Or it's not good enough that we have an energy efficient building, but the products that we create have harmful chemicals that stay in the earth for thousands of years. And so it's going beyond that. It's starting for people to be comfortable with, even so far as circular economy thinking and sustainability thinking, and some of the things that we've talked about here in terms of understanding that we have a set of stakeholders, right? I've appreciated the continual blending, honestly, too, in business between purpose and profit, even to the extent that the Business Roundtable in the US, which is, the Fortune 500 CEOs, changed the purpose of a corporation from serving shareholders to stakeholders. So I think we're getting there. And I think the pressures, especially we've seen over the last years, are sort of accelerating that. But I think we have a ways to go, but we're moving. We're moving.
Jessie, do you think things are kind of looking more optimistic as we go into 2022?
I think relatively. I think there's been a kind of reckoning moment across a lot of different topics and themes. So we said like sustainability, D&I, tech regulation. I think that's going to happen. I think, just thinking about, for example, you were talking there about regulation around safety of the internet, like 2023, the online safety bill is going to hopefully come in. And I think essentially making Ofcom that kind of de facto regulator of internet content, that should on the surface of things have a really positive effect, because just because the regulation doesn't come in until the year after next, there'll be lots of changes that happen, positive changes around the internet, around what tech platforms do, and making sure that they're kind of held to account and baking in ethics, as Whynde said, right from the beginning. So a lot of those kind of regulations are going to be put in. It will encourage positive change, and I'm hoping that's going to be something that organizations embrace. And as Sally mentioned earlier, seeing some of these challenges and problems as actually opportunities for something that good can come out of it, and we can think differently. So yeah, I think there's positivity ahead. I think obviously there's going to be a lot of the, as we talked about, the kind of technical debt things that people are going to have to go back and look at as well. So this kind of seesawing of how do we drive forward and make sure that we're relevant for the future, whilst we also deal with all the things that we change really quickly overnight. And I think that's where we're going to still have some kind of flux, I guess, between kind of good news and maybe some of the lesser good news.
Going back to another part of your report you touched on around kind of communities, one of the things that I think I observed is the sort of global and local sort of shifting thinking, as in, perhaps people are reconnecting with their local communities. Do you think this links to the subgenre kind of trend that perhaps elaborate a little bit on that subgenre trend? But is that where people are sort of reconnecting and sort of online they're finding people that they relate to because that's the sort of new local community, or am I completely talking nonsense?
I think that's really interesting. I think there's like two things at play. I think we've got, as a result of any crisis, as we talked about earlier, there's lots of different ways that people react to that. So for example, you get, like we had in kind of roaring 20s, the kind of like hedonism and people saying, oh, this is a really bad time, so we're going to have really great times now, we're going to go loads of holidays, we'll go out and have loads of fun. You've then got the other side of that where people say, well, I want to really focus in on my community and what I can do with my local people and find a sense of self in that sense. You get the other kind of side of it where people may be feeling kind of more depressed and insular, and you kind of get, because kind of lots of different, I guess, reactions that people have. I think you're right. I think people are more focused on the people that are nearest and dearest to them and their local communities, and I think that will continue. But I think, as you rightly said, and we've seen lots of talk about like the metaverse and what that means for us, I think people are realizing that there's got their kind of in-person communities and there's these digital communities, and there's whole other worlds out there and people they can connect with. And I think it's just as we go into kind of Web3 and like looking at the next era of the internet and what that means for us, it moves on beyond social media to these entire worlds where we can connect with people that have similar interests to us and really like invest in that. So I think that's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. Absolutely fascinates me.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought up the M word, because I was wanting for us to talk about the metaverse, because I think there's so much being talked about it, and the cynical person perhaps might say, well, this is just the tech companies trying to create the next sort of wave for everyone to spend their money on. But in reality, this has been a long time coming. So I will openly admit that many years ago I dabbled with Second Life for a few months until I kind of got bored of it. And in fact, the company I worked for at the time was even exploring doing training. We were doing e-learning. We were doing training in person, and we were dabbling with even doing training delivered in Second Life in like VR I suppose early VR. So this for me is almost been a technology that's been trying to break out of a small niche. I mean, if you look at gaming communities, you've got massive sort of online gaming communities that I think provide an amazing opportunity to escape at a time when it's hard to escape in the real world, when you're sort of trapped perhaps in your local area, particularly when there are lockdowns. Sally, and Whynde, I'm interested in your sort of thoughts on metaverse. Is it just a load of hype? And of course, things always are overhyped in the short term, but have perhaps a greater impact in the long term. But for me, this isn't a new thing. This is something that's been bubbling away in the fringes for some time. But Sally, what's your sort of take?
It's happening. It's happened. People are, or our children, our future workforce are living in whole worlds. Minecraft is for kids, and they create. My friend was telling me that her daughter had a carnation in Minecraft. Like, it is actually quite amazing how creative and the skills that they're getting for the future workforce that isn't happening within education. And there's just going to be the consolidation of those virtual worlds. The thing that I worry about is who is owning that world, and people's awareness of what they're going to do with that data and how they're going to, that therefore might control our decisions.
Yeah.
I still think there's just a real lack of understanding of the consequence. So Echo, everyone is in in people's houses, and my friends say, oh, I've got nothing that's controversial, but if they're denied a mortgage because of the data that is harvested from their Echo devices, then that will have, and maybe they won't realize that, but that will have impact. And it's that invisibility that really worries me. And I just think it's again, power in few hands trend of metaverse, rather than the concept of something that could be quite beautiful and amazing.
Totally agree. And Oliver, I think as I've heard you say, the future's already here. It's just unevenly distributed, right? I feel like that's very much the case here. It's a strategic opportunity and concern for organizations right now. Sally, I agree with your concerns around the data, and I would add mine too around the human aspect and what this really does, and just making sure that we understand the implications and have our lives and societies and education balanced enough with human and virtual.
It's a bit like, I suppose, some of the fears people probably had about the internet, right? I remember, so I went to uni at the kind of late 90s, and the internet was just sort of becoming a thing then, and I was sort of remember chatting to my my now wife about, I wonder where this might lead, because at the time it was very techy, it was a very geeky thing. There was only a few companies that had a website and things like that. And it kind of feels a little bit like that's where we are with this. And then there's 2 points I suppose I would make here. One is that scares me because we still don't really have the existing internet in a good place in terms of controls and safety measures and things like that. And then the other thing is ultimately what that's going to kind of do to society. Is it going to help things like sustainability? And I'll explain what I mean by that. So I've been saying for a while, I fear Western society at least is on a course to have to virtualize society. But what do I mean by that? I mean, we consume too much in the real world. The only way really to live out the Western lifestyle where it consumes multiple planets, if we all consume this way, it's to switch it all virtual. And as long as the metaverse is powered by sustainable energy and it's not creating a lot of electronic waste and damaging the planet, if you want to go and do something hedonistic or something, you want to kind of go and do something like go and fly somewhere, well, if the experience is good enough in the metaverse for you to do that, you can go and have your trip to wherever virtually, or do your driving that pollutes. If you're a petrol head, my son and I are really into one of the big driving games at the moment, and it's kind of quite a nice sort of counterweight to the electric car, because if you want to go and have a noisy driving experience, you just turn on the computer now instead of getting in the car. So I just wonder whether there's aspects of some of this which is beneficial, but there's also bits of it that are just completely unknown at the moment and will lead to kind of undesirable sort of consequences.
You're right. I mean, but again, I go back to the point. There's always winners and losers within massive change. So dot-com era, there were winners, and again, more to my social economic point, it's just the direct impact on rising inequality. I am excited and fascinated, but I just hope we have our eyes a little wider, and then have our curiosity going into this, because we know it's coming, rather than before. It started with that beautiful premise around democratizing information so everyone, and it's free, and it comes from a very pure and scientific place, and then we envelop it with society. As long as this time society has its eyes open, and I go back to that critical thinking skills, we might be able to not just be a passenger, but helpfully shape.
The other piece of this for me is how interoperable it'll be. My concern at the moment is it's almost like where you had AOL and things like that in the early online, where they create walled gardens. You'll have the first generation of this could be quite fragmented.
For me, they're related. They're not the same, but I guess what we've seen with NFTs as well, where everyone is jumping on the bandwagon without actually any much kind of forethought for why are we doing this. It's almost become, at the moment, I was discussing with colleagues, using NFTs has almost become the next marketing tactic. So whereas before it was we're going to do it on social, that's different, that's been exhausted. So we'll put an NFT and it will get talked about because it's new. And I think we're going to see a lot of that over the next year, where people are creating their own worlds and doing those things without much kind of forethought of where that's going. So I think the winners in that, as Sally was saying, there's always winners and losers. The winners are going to be the ones that don't just jump on the bandwagon, but think about from a business perspective, where does it actually make sense for us to use this and experiment? And I think I'd really recommend taking read. If you don't, I sign up to David Mattan's New World, Same Humans newsletter. Fascinating, looking at tech and the implications. And he was talking about a person who is looking to kind of create his own world, own metaverse, and everyone will have some kind of the same currency. So the idea is it's got this kind of idea of this kind of egalitarian society where everyone is given the same things. And David Mattan was talking about the fact that actually eventually what will happen is it will just be a replication of society at the moment, right, where there is inequality. It's baked into the way that we live. And that point around how do we manage that, I don't know, but I think it would be potentially kind of naive of us to expect that we'll go into this extra world and when it's not going to have lots of the problems that our current world has, and that's kind of sad, but hopefully there'll be some people that do good with it.
That's really interesting, because for me, when you look at technology that companies have, it's often reflective of their own organizational structure, right? And so when you perhaps take a look at this holistically, do we have the technology that reflects, unfortunately, our imperfections in our society and our culture and the world we live in? And I rationalize some of this with just, unfortunately, it's not a perfect world, and therefore some things just aren't fair. Which doesn't mean we shouldn't strive to improve them, but yeah, I think that's a really interesting point around the metaverse will be equal parts kind of, good and bad, I suppose.
Looking at it as a new opportunity, and especially as you said, Jessie, it's likely to be a replication of our current world. So, but as our thoughts evolve and our mindsets evolve and our real physical world evolve, then hopefully it will do so there. But it's almost like where we were with what is digital a long time ago. I don't really know, but my competitors are doing it and everybody's talking about it, so I need to go do that thing. I feel like that's a little bit where it is, and it's also sort of underpinning all these things. I believe that technology only magnifies our ethics and our values and our gifts and our challenges where we're at right now. So I think it's just important to be cognizant and intentional, because it only accelerates,
Thanks, Whynde. No, that's great. So what I'd like to do now is move on to your own thoughts. You can echo things we've already talked about, but what are you seeing coming up? Perhaps obvious things or other off the wall ideas and hopes and dreams, I suppose, for 2022. And Sally, if I can start with you.
Not to diminish the value of this incredible session, but predictions might be slightly dead. So we just need to be able to respond and take people along with us. My personal hopes and dreams, are around prioritizing personal community. So I survived lockdown through a friend of mine doing a 7 at 7, which is 7 exercises at 7 a.m. It got me out of bed. It wasn't that much hardship, but the friendships and the sense of community and belonging, was just so important to me. And that has continued on in the offline world or in real life, enabled me to feel like a sense of rootedness or grounded to my local environment. I hope that continues, and that then manifests itself into things like community power to make disruption and fight back against greenwashing, so consumers do realize how much more power we have. From a business perspective, I think we just need to invest in our people and our talent. We've expected so much from our people, and we need to support them from a mental health perspective, but from a learning perspective, because there's new technologies coming off, there's new demands. We need to be even more responsive, and we can only expect more from people if we prioritize investment in talent. And I've just seen that slipped off, where we've just been so busy surviving.
Yeah, no, I really like your points about being able to respond and being more people centric. No, that's really nice points. Jessie, I know you've spoken a lot about the trends report, but for you personally, is there anything you're kind of hoping will sort of take off in the coming year?
Seeing how, as kind of Sally's point around how as people, as kind of friends, as colleagues as well, we can start to be more there for each other, be more empathetic, all that kind of stuff, and make sure that we're really looking after ourselves and starting to, as you said, kind of dichotomy of all the things that we do offline, and really starting to invest in that and realize that, lots of companies and lots of nations are trialing this 4-day work week and being a bit easier on ourselves, I think, in this kind of really fast-paced world. And I think that personally I'm going to be kind of committing to that for next year, and really focusing on doing a few things better than saying yes to everything. I think that's probably a good kind of mantra for individuals and businesses alike, to be honest. And yeah, I think similar with the business side of things as well is just how businesses can start to be a bit more resilient and focus on their people, focusing on the long term. I think that's what I'm fascinated as well in from a kind of marketing and the PR perspective, is thinking about longer term projects, or maybe products as we talked about, but kind of longer term thinking and mixing that with the kind of short term speed that we've always focused on so much. I think it will just give everyone a bit more space to breathe, and probably better ideas will come out of it. So I guess that's what I'm looking forward to as well, as a moment to kind of reset and think about things longer term and not always just kind of what's happening tomorrow.
Yeah, no, balancing, as Sally said, the kind of need to respond with the need to sort of take a breath and go, right, where are we headed as an organization, or where am I headed in my career? Or yeah, that really resonates. Whynde, thoughts from you?
Yeah, love both of your thoughts there. I do think there's a pattern and maybe a hope for having that adaptation to change just being business as usual. And it's, as we were saying, it's the resilience and finding the opportunity and the joy in that challenge. So I think maybe a little bit more of that. Maybe my hopes anyway. I think underpinning some of these cool things that we talk about and being able to truly work in ecosystems, I think organizations need to adapt more of a composable business, componentized business perspective. There's certainly talk about that, but really shifting the mindset and then the business and technology environment to do that, because I think there's resilience in that. I think there's a lot of opportunity for expansion and connection around the world in doing that. From a business perspective, and I'm even going to say from an educational perspective, I would love to see our minds shift around sustainability, circular economy. That's just the way we work. That's just the way we design organizations and societies, and no longer sort of something over here separate that we're working towards, but this is just the way it is. And guess what? It makes sense for everybody, for humans, for organizations, for societies. Maybe the last hope I have is just the continued trend around the future is human, and really embracing that, whether they're customers, employees, the future is human.
Thank you, Whynde, and thank you all of you. Your perspectives have been really, really interesting, and also a massive thanks for joining, because often for these conversations I struggle to get one lady, and so in fact the last version of this is just Sally, and it was brilliant that this time round it's completely the other way around and I'm outnumbered, which is wonderful. The beauty of these conversations is where you get different people from different industries, different perspectives coming to talk. So particularly interested in female speakers, in diverse speakers, in having a conversation. So this has been a wonderful, refreshing recording, and personally I found it really, really interesting. Hopefully you have as well. And so yeah, with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time. It's been brilliant, and look forward to getting you involved in future conversations with the community.
Thanks, Oliver.
Thanks, Oliver.
Right.